around the world, helping them to reimagine not just their work, but their impact on the world. And we thought the release of Seth's new book, The Song of Significance, was a great excuse to discuss leadership, significance in our roles, and the transformative possibilities of rethinking our work environment. Whether you're at the start of your career, in the midst of it, or leading a team of your own, this conversation is for you. We can all play a role in making our workplaces more human, more empathetic, and more empowering. There's no better time to start that journey than right now, so smash those reaction buttons and join me in welcoming Seth Godin. Welcome, Seth.
What a great intro. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. Now, to get us started, I just thought I'd ask you, what is the Song of Significance?
I asked 10,000 people to tell me about the best job they ever had. And what's interesting is everyone knows about the best job they ever had. It's like your first date. You never forget the best job you ever had. And I gave them 14 choices. What made it the best job you ever had? And I started with the ones that bosses think. I got paid a lot. I didn't get fired, right? Stuff like that. And I got to tell people what to do. No one picked those things. No one. The answers that came up over and over again were, I accomplished more than I thought I could. People treated me with respect. I did work that I was proud of with people I cared about. That makes us feel human. The Song of Significance is our chance to show up with the 90,000 hours we're going to spend at work, to do something that elevates us as opposed to grinding our way through it.
Yeah, so if someone, and I'd love to bring up this great quadrant, we're calling it the trust and stakes quadrant, to talk about, just to really illustrate where significance lives, because what you talk about with significance is sort of the trust and the stakes. So we'll pull that up, but could you tell us like where significance lives on that axis?
Well, first, just to set the setting here, we've got 120 years of industrialism, factories making stuff ever cheaper, ever faster. It made everyone around the world richer than if we hadn't done it. But if you have a factory, sooner or later, you're going to start using a stopwatch on your employees. You're going to surveil them. You're going to treat them like machines. This is where the term human resources comes from. If humans are a resource, then your job is to turn the dial on them. And this led to the whole idea of people getting jerked around. The phrase jerked around came from Henry Ford's assembly line, people getting pulled one way or the other. So if your mindset is we have an assembly line, whether we make insurance policies or cars, then what you're doing is you're surveilling your workers. You are measuring everything, you're writing everything down, you're getting them to do it faster and cheaper. That's management. On the other hand, what we want as humans is not to be surveilled, but to solve interesting problems, to do something that's new and important. So the grid we're talking about here is simple, which is if the stakes are high, right, like the airplane, we don't want it to crash. Well, then the question is, how much trust do we have of the person who's flying it? Well, the airlines surveil everything. They don't let the baggage handler or the pilot make stuff up as they go along. That's good, because we want it to be just like it was yesterday. On the other hand, if the stakes are high and the trust is high, that's the heart surgeon. We're not sitting there monitoring. We're under anesthesia. We trusted this person to figure out in the moment how to save our life, and she does so. So the jobs we all do are either high stakes or low stakes, and high trust or low trust. So we're just 2 floors up from a Starbucks. And if you go into get a coffee at a Starbucks or any coffee place, the stakes are pretty low. If it's a bad coffee, you could probably buy another one. The question is, what is the trust like? Because if you're going to a local place where you've passed 3 chain places on your way to get there, you trust that barista. They trust you. You talk to each other. You see each other. You're human. That's not the same as walking to a place where they press this button, and read you a script. So it doesn't matter how big the company is. It doesn't matter how much is at stake. What matters is, are you trusted to be a person?
So if you look at, so most people probably they live outside of that quadrant of high trust and high stakes. But is their work not significant, or does significant in this context mean something a little bit different?
Oh, I think low stakes, high trust work is just as significant.
Yeah.
that barista, that person who greeted you on your way into the operating room, that person who sold you the ticket for the train, they could choose to have a significant day by connecting to other people and refusing the indoctrination that has been pushed on us, which is do as you're told, stay off the hook. And what I'm arguing is not that we should make work softer. I'm saying we should raise our standards. And the way we raise our standards is by creating the conditions where people want to bring their whole self to the project.
A lot of people who are young in their careers may kind of think of these concepts and say, oh, I'm in a low trust, low stakes environment, or a low trust, high stakes environment. But the common thing is there seems to be, a lot of surveillance, not a lot of trust. What do you say to people who are in that situation?
Well, we have brainwashed people all throughout school. The expression, will this be on the test, is a smart thing to ask a teacher, because if it's not, don't bother, right? And so that's what we learned all along. And now a whole generation is coming along that says to the bosses, to the industrialists, you've been promising me and my parents and my grandparents that if we just did what we were told, you would take care of us. And you've been breaking that promise. You've been wrecking the environment we live in. You've been laying people off. You've been treating us worse. You're keeping most of the money. I'm out. And so they're phoning it in, quiet quitting, the whole great resignation thing. But the solution is simple. Not to ask for more authority, but to take more responsibility. That if we give the people we work with a promise and we keep it, even if it's a small one, we get to do it again. All of us work with somebody who brings a different attitude to work and gets more joy out of it as a result, who is looking at the thing they do as a project to be danced with, not something to be fought with. And that doesn't mean you have to settle for whatever's going on at work. What it means is that if you have the time to be watching you and I speaking, you probably are working in a place where the surveillance is not complete. And you probably have enough agency to change something a little. Could you start a book club at work? Would they fire you for starting a book club at work? Because if you started a book club at work and 3 other people joined in, you will have made a small pocket of change. And then you can do it again, and you can do it again.
Well, I think I know which book can be the first step on the book club. What I was kind of interested was this. You mentioned human resources. Tell us how you really feel about the term human resources.
Well, because I don't have a real job, it's easy for me to roll my eyes at what the industrial system settles for. But the thing is that it's a short-term way of thinking. That if you insist that there's only one smart person in the building and they're going to tell everybody what to do, if you're going to insist that it has to just be 5% faster and cheaper on a regular basis, you're going to lose. And the reason you're going to lose is the world changes. And so Western Union was really good at what they did, but then people stopped sending telegrams. And they had the chance to buy the phone company, and they didn't do it because they didn't understand how to look at the new thing.
Blockbuster, Netflix, same thing.
Yeah, right? Where's Blockbuster? What's interesting about Netflix is they 3 times changed their business completely. That's really rare. And the people who changed it weren't the people who were in charge. The smartest person in the organization is usually the frontline person who's dancing with the customers, not the person who's cashing the big checks in the CEO's office. But if you're forced to insulate yourself from the market, you're going to build a brittle system that's just going to fade away.
I was surprised to learn in your book that management as a concept is relatively recent. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, so management and leadership aren't the same thing. We use the words in English interchangeably. We assume that managers are leaders and that leaders are managers. It's completely not true. Managers are on the org chart. They have power and authority. They can say to you, do what I say or you're fired. McDonald's needs managers. Otherwise, no one would come to their shift, right? Managing isn't bad, but it's not leading. Leading is voluntary. Leading is exploring the future. Leading is doing something that might not work. And following a leader is voluntary. So if you have to order people to follow you, you're not a leader, you're a manager. If we can create the conditions for this sort of change to happen, we can lead. So when did management get invented? It got invented when the assembly line got invented. It got invented when it used to be that everywhere in the world, no one knew exactly what time it was. That we synchronized our watches only a couple hundred years ago because everyone had to be at the factory at starting time. That's when you need managers. If you're hunting and farming, you don't need a manager. You're on your own.
For the people at home who are managers and they're having a moment of like, wait, am I a manager or am I a leader? What questions should they be asking themselves?
Well, it's a hat you can put on and take off.
Yeah.
So I've had jobs where I was a manager and had lots of people working for me, and I'm bad at that. But I knew when I was managing things, right? You have to have sometimes difficult conversations about very straightforward standards and dates and compliance. And sometimes you have to put on your leadership hat. And your leadership hat says, I'm going over there. Who wants to come with me? Can I create an environment where people want to come with me? So when we built the Carbon Almanac, I was a volunteer. I worked on it full time for over a year. 300 people, it's now 1,900, in 90 countries came together, and all volunteers built a 97,000 word book, footnoted, no errors, shipped on time. But I didn't manage it because I couldn't. I couldn't order anybody to do anything. All I could do was lead. And some people showed up and said, I want to be the managing editor of this section. And they were able to say to people who had signed up, I need this by this date. But we need both. You should just figure out which hat you want to wear.
Well, you bring up the Carbon Almanac. Could you tell us a little bit about the page 19 principle?
Okay, so when we started working on the Almanac, we knew there was going to be a page 19 between page 18 and page 20. But we also knew that nobody was qualified and authorized to do the charts, the graphs, the writing, the fact-checking, the footnoting for page 19. No one, not one of us, could make page 19 by ourselves. So we said, if that's the case, what we need is a different culture that says, write a paragraph, come up with a sentence, suggest a headline, and then hand it to the rest of us and say, please make this better. Do not criticize the worker, but relentlessly improve the work. Please make this better. And so page 19 got built a little bit at a time, and many people touched it and improved it. And so one story I tell is a guy named Vivek showed up. He lives more than 10,000 miles from here. And he wrote 6 paragraphs of an article, and it was really not good. Now, of course, it wasn't his first language. I only have one language, so I can't criticize him. But we made it better. And he looked at what we did, and he wrote another article that was 50% better than the first one. And we made that better. And then the third one couldn't be improved. And he ended up contributing 17 of the articles in the Almanac.
Wow.
In the old model of management, he would have been fired. But here, page 19 says, look, nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows what the future of this company or this organization or this spiritual practice is going to be. Let's put an improvement on the table and make it better.
Yeah, and the best contributors are often the ones who contribute the most, not necessarily the best. We often say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of good. And you are so good at coming up with terms. So I wanted to discuss some more of them for everyone. So to get us started, could you tell us what a useful imposter is?
Okay, so do you ever have imposter syndrome?
All the time.
It's rampant. It's an epidemic. And it's that feeling that we're not authorized, qualified, or ready. That is a feeling that you should get when you're about to do generous leadership, because you're not a sociopath or a psychopath. You're somebody who deep down knows you have never done this before, but no, neither has anyone else. That's what leadership is. So the way you get rid of imposter syndrome is not by getting rid of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a good thing. It shows you that you're leading. And when it shows up, you should say thank you. Thank you for reminding me that I'm doing something important here. Don't fight it to go away. Embrace it. The same way running in a marathon and getting tired, they go together. Okay, so the useful imposter is somebody who is generously, not hyping, not hustling, not being a fraud, generously for other people inventing a future that doesn't exist yet, even though they can't prove it. It will only be proven once we do it. So get enrollment, invite people to go on the journey, describe the future. No classes and seminars I've run, I've encouraged people to say the expression, this might not work. It's really hard to say that. I made t-shirts for a group that was in my office, and getting everyone to put the t-shirts on was really hard. This might not work. It's a very useful expression.
Well, that's a great segue into another term I really love. I want to adopt in my practice, the pre-mortem.
Right. So when you're going to do a project, it's really helpful to do two things before you start. Number one, write down a rave review. The person you're trying to do this for, because not every person is going to be your customer, the person this is for, if they wrote a 5-paragraph review of how this was the best thing ever, write it. Write it in detail. And then also write down in detail why your project failed. What was it about your project that was an epic failure? With those two things in your hand, now you have guidelines on what to build. So, an example, there's an eye hospital in India called Aravind. There are more people on Earth who have had their eyesight saved by Aravind than the population of New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles put together. If you go to Aravind, eye surgery costs either $130 or $0. It's up to you. Totally voluntary, whichever one you want. And what's their pre-mortem? The pre-mortem is, I went to Aravind, I didn't pay anything for my eye surgery, I got an infection, and now I'm blind. That's the worst thing that could happen. So they decided to obsess about how do you manage so there will be no infections. And the infection rate at Aravind is less than in an eye hospital in London. It is one of the safest places in the world to have eye surgery because they built something to make it so that wouldn't happen, as opposed to the rave, because what would be the rave when you leave? Well, A, the rave is I can see, but the other one is I didn't pay anything and they treated me with respect. And so most of the people who work at Aravind aren't actually eye surgeons, they're the rest of the staff. And their whole mission is to bring humanity to the patient, regardless of whether you paid or not. So they have accomplished both things by starting with what is the thing we're trying for and what is the thing we're trying to avoid.
Well, I will definitely be thinking about that as I adopt my future projects. Another one I really loved was, and this is related when we're thinking about our projects and measuring success, but the idea of false proxies.
Okay, so this is a big one, so I'm going to talk directly to people because I care about this one a lot. You can't go to the supermarket and taste the ketchup before you buy the ketchup. You have to look at the label and make a decision. They don't let you taste. You can't go to the bookstore and read the whole book before you buy the book. They make you judge a book by its cover. We need proxies, labels. The thing about work is we have used these labels to undermine the people we care about, the people in our society, to create caste systems and racism and misogyny because we judge people based on all the wrong measures. So if you are interviewing somebody for a job, why are you doing that? Is their job to be interviewed? Like if you were interviewing me before we came on, that would be good because you're interviewing me now. That's my job. But in general, that's not what people do for a living. So instead of figuring out if this is someone you want to date or have lunch with or hang out with, why don't you just figure out if they can do this work in a way that works in the community for the organization? And we don't do that because we want control, because we think we have good taste, and so we reinforce all of these mistaken beliefs, and that leads to trauma, but also leads to reduced productivity because we end up hiring people who are good at getting hired as opposed to hiring people who are good at doing their job.
Yeah, well, I really love that, and I also love what you call real skills because we need to rebrand soft skills. So tell us about real skills.
So what are the hard skills? I think we can all agree. Can you code in C++? How many words per minute can you type? How many pounds can you bench press? These are things that are easy to measure. And you can learn to get better at them and brag about them. So the old LinkedIn had lots of those where you could get checkboxes for them. But what we also know is that when we talk about who did you work with that made a difference? When we talk about who changed the organization, when we talk about who's the best hire you ever made, we don't list those things. What we list is this person creative, agreeable, easy to work with, persistent, productive, all these things that sound like talents that you're born with. But that's nonsense. I've never met a toddler who had any of those talents. These are skills. We learn them. You can learn to be more honest. You can learn to be more appropriately direct. You can learn to be more generous. But when we call them soft skills, we're sort of demeaning them. And what I'm saying is, if you made a list of what those were and got 5% better at them every day, within 30 days, you'd be a superstar. And there's nothing keeping you from doing that.
Well, you have a whole list of them in your book, and I did the exercise of highlighting the ones I thought I was good at. I found it very, very helpful. And just anyone at home, if you have any questions or comments for
do we get to do the questions? I love the questions.
Oh,
your
yeah.
questions are great, but like put them in the comments.
Those live questions are great. We do have one from Andrea. In your view, how can we overcome and have assertive communication, since nowadays everything is so busy and without time?
I think I understand the first half. If I get the question wrong, tell me. But the expression "let's get real" or "let's not play" is super important. This idea of enrollment. So if you're in the surgical suite and there's the scrub nurse and there's the surgeon, there's not a lot of chit-chat. It's, give me this thing. No, I meant that thing. Right? Back and forth. Yes, chef. Here it is. We're talking to each other directly. You can't do that to somebody who doesn't have that relationship with you. You have to know it before you start. So one of the things I'm arguing in the book is that significant work makes a change happen, and we need to know who we're changing and what is the change we seek to make. If we can agree on that, now let's agree on how we will talk to one another. We will talk to one another with respect. I will never strip you of your dignity, but I will also be very direct. If there's something we can do to help us both get to where we are going, we should tell each other. We shouldn't worry about, but if I tell them this, they'll think I did, because then we end up, the whole thing falls apart, particularly once the organization has more than 4 people in it. Because if you're spending all that time not being clear, you're not going to get the work done.
And that actually brings up an interesting idea, because we all were told, oh, everyone, follow your passions, and is that's not the same as finding work that is significant.
No.
And
I have never told anyone to follow their passions. Follow their passions is as bad advice as be authentic. Both of those things do not make any sense.
Be inauthentic.
Be consistent. All right, so let's start with follow your passions. If you have hobbies, good for you. You should follow your passion. But when we go to work, the way you will have a happy career is if you decide to become passionate about what you do, not insist on doing what you are passionate about. So a few blocks from here is a cafe that I wrote about in my book, Linchpin. And the guy who ran the whole thing was the lowest paid person in the organization. And in Rockefeller Center in New York, he cleaned the tables, he greeted the guests, just like anybody in any coffee shop. He worked there for years. He decided to be passionate about this as opposed to phoning it in. That doesn't mean everyone should accept every job. It just means this passion is a choice. We can come to be passionate about something. And what you're really looking for is not, oh, my life dream is to touch coffee beans or paper cups. My life dream is to be missed if I'm gone. My life dream is to be with people who want me to be there. Go find that in whatever job it is. And as for the authentic thing, that's an internet thing that was started by people who want to stand on the sidelines and watch people melt down. And we need a few people on various social media to do that for entertainment, but you don't need to do that. What we want from you is consistency. Make a promise and keep it. Be the best version of the brand, the person we think you are, and your career will go great. But if you are authentically in a really bad mood and you choose somebody out, you don't get any points for that. No one wants you to do that.
Yeah, no one says, thank you for your authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
Some other questions we're getting from the audience, some great questions. Seth, how do we equip the talent, this is from Jason, how do we equip the talent for this new marketplace, and how early is too early?
Okay, so what do actual corporate organizational leaders need to do for a living, right? That Satya doesn't code, and the people who are building cars, the CEO isn't making the car. So what do? What they do is create the conditions for the entity to get where it's going. So an extreme example is Jimmy Wales at Wikipedia. Jimmy Wales did not edit that Wikipedia article. He helped create the conditions for someone to want to come edit it. And so if you've got a 4-year-old in the house, a 9-year-old in the house, are you indoctrinating them to get an A, to train them to be an employee, or are you creating the conditions in your family for people to find and solve interesting problems with generosity, to take responsibility as opposed to demanding authority? So I don't think there's an age that's too young for that to start. We organized our whole world around getting a factory job starting in the 1850s, but we don't have factory jobs anymore. So maybe we need to rethink school. Maybe we need to rethink how toddlers are spending their time. We need to rethink why you went to graduate school and why, where and why you went. Because if it's worth looking up, it's not worth memorizing. We can now look up everything we need to. We don't need people who have more facts. We need people who can make decisions. That's what we actually make for a living, decisions.
And that is not what kids are taught to do.
Correct.
And I think this is probably a good note to sort of end us on. But Hashir asks, how can a person who is not the manager and just an employee really lead from that position and build influence?
So the first thing I would say is get a Sharpie and write the word just in really big letters on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Then rip it into 400 pieces and light it on fire and never use that word again.
Remove that from your vocabulary, everybody. The word just.
As soon as you say that word, you've bought into the managerial authoritarian mindset. The CEOs, I know a lot of CEOs, don't want you to buy into that mindset. What they say to me is, please come give a speech because I want people to get outside of that zone and start leading from wherever they are. You will never get a blank check. And you will never change everything. The essence of significance is what is the smallest useful element of significance you can create today? The smallest possible one. Could you write a thank you note to one customer who's not expecting it? Could you walk over to the receptionist's desk and say something to that person that will help them have a better day? Could you, as we said, start a book club? What's the smallest little thing you could do? Because if you could do that, you're not going to get fired. And tomorrow you could do that and one more thing. And the way people become leaders, and I was super lucky in my first job because I ended up being able to do that pretty quickly. I had no employees and I had 40 people reporting to me at the same time. Because what I did was I said, I have a project I'm trying to do, and I enlisted people a little bit at a time until we ended up shipping 5 pieces of software that all went gold. As a group, it wasn't my software, it was our software. And that is where change comes from. It almost never comes from the corporate office or from the person. The Big Mac wasn't invented in Illinois. The Big Mac was invented by a franchisee who violated the rules just a little bit and invented a new sandwich, and then headquarters came and took it.
Yeah, I love that sort of collaborative vision for the workforce, that it does require some deprogramming from what we were all raised to do and how management has existed.
Yeah. So I like to finish things by saying, go make a ruckus. And I would like to explain what that means.
Please.
A ruckus is not selfish, and a ruckus is not noise. A ruckus is what happens when you turn on lights and open doors. That if doors need opening, go open them if it helps other people. Because the more you do that, the more people will let you do that. And I know it goes against everything you were taught by your 3rd grade teacher, but Miss Binder is not in the room anymore. So go make a ruckus.
Well, Seth, thank you so much for joining.
A pleasure.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Creator Conversations. Special thanks to Seth for sharing his time and insights with us today. I encourage you all to check out Seth's latest book, The Song of Significance, which is now available wherever books are sold. It's an important read for anyone who wants to reimagine and reshape the future of work. Make sure to follow Seth on LinkedIn or wherever else you find him. He frequently shares valuable insights that can elevate your understanding of the work landscape.
And there's a LinkedIn course for it.
And
it's free this week.
LinkedIn Learning Course. Can you give us the name of the course?
Just look for significance in my name. I forgot the name of the course. Oh, no.
Amazing. We'll link to it.
We'll link. Can we link to things here on LinkedIn?
We can link. We're linking. It's LinkedIn. Perfect.
Thank you.
Until next time, I'm Scott Rising, and thank you.